Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We are digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We'd love to hear where you think we got it right, where you think we got it wrong, where we're completely off our rockers. You can do that by visiting unsilentpodcast.com, Rumble, Facebook, all the various and sundry social media channels that we visit to vent our frustrations. And of course, the president has many frustrations right now. Brian, you might have heard that he's very upset about gas prices. And he says they should be at $2.50 a gallon. I don't know if you heard that.
I did not, but I'll take that.
Yeah, I'll take that. The only problem is it doesn't have any bearing on his demands. Don't really seem to have very much bearing on reality, because it turns out that so let's just rewind a little bit. Because China has been very benevolent. Maybe I don't think it's that they love us so much, but they've got much more massive petroleum reserves, strategic petroleum reserves, than most people realized. And because their imports, according to the best information, they haven't tried to import a lot of oil in the past several months. They've just living on their strategic petroleum reserves, and so they therefore haven't driven the price of gas, or haven't driven the price of oil up. But the problem is not that oil is an issue, and oil is still, oil's trading remarkably low. It should be trading much higher, probably $90 a barrel or higher, even with China's using their strategic petroleum reserves. But the fact is, we don't have enough global gas refining capacity to refine enough gas to keep us at this low price. So therefore, we're going to continue to pay higher gas prices. And you don't just turn on a switch and start refining gas overnight. So,
you do, but you don't do billions of barrels a day. You do maybe millions of barrels a day, or whatever it is.
It up.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna guess that refineries have a capacity like any other manufacturing type business, and you bring in crude or whatever, and you put out gasoline, but they got to have limitations, as a ceiling on capacity, like anybody else. And I'm sure they're running at full capacity, but it ain't enough to dig out of a hole overnight. That's for sure.
Well, and the other problem, I mean, none of this stuff is stuff I've known before, but given what's been going on in the world, I've been looking into it. The refineries, there are many, many, many different types of oil in the world. There's that we talk about the two big ones, Brent crude and WTI. But there's lots of different types of oil in the world, and lots of different types of oil refineries in the world. And if you can refine this kind of oil, it doesn't mean you can refine any kind of oil. It means you're specifically tuned to refine this type of oil and not everything else. And so you just can't, if oil supplies shift, you just can't automatically turn on a dime and say, okay, we're going to take this different type of crude in. We're not going to take lighter crude versus darker crude and turn it on in overnight. It just doesn't work like that.
Right.
So it's more complicated than people think.
Yeah, I think that we're continuing to see that we either vastly underestimated, or just completely miscalculated, or completely overlooked, or whatever, a number of issues with this whole what do you call it? Excursion? That's what we called it.
Excursion, yes.
It's our little foray into Iran. Not really panning out as anybody would have hoped, probably, or maybe it is. I don't know. What do I know?
Well, I don't think anybody can look at it and say it's turned out. I mean, clearly the smart people knew that this was a possibility, and they just thought, who knows what they thought. They just followed along with what I saw a clip from Marco Rubio the other day. It was actually today, I think, and basically he said, "Look, we just all, and he spun it properly because he's probably he's the best speaker in Washington D.C. He's one of the best orators on in politics today, and he essentially said, look, there's no. Somebody asked him about what kind of sort of division there is between him and J.D. Vance, because they're the two front runners for the Republican
Yeah.
nomination to succeed Trump, and he basically said, no, there's everybody on the president's team essentially just executes his foreign policy. There's no, light between any of us. And, we share our opinions, but there's no light between any of us. So, this is all the direction of the president of the United States. And that's what's put us where we're at right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you kind of have to say that. I don't know that I
Yeah.
believe any of that. That we're all just doing what he said, and we are all kumbaya. I don't know if I believe any of that stuff.
Well, sure.
But
There's always politics.
I mean, you kind of have to say that. So
Yep.
okay, I'll go along with that. That's fine. Can they can continue saying that stuff, and then the gloves will come off when it's election time, and then we'll really know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
So,
go ahead.
well, one of the other things is, as you and I are recording, we're only a few days away from our 250th birthday as a nation.
Yeah.
And there's a few things I thought were kind of interesting about that. I'm going to play you a clip here. This is a CNN clip. It's about 40 seconds long. Pretty fascinating, I think, though, as far as just kind of how citizens of the country kind of see ourselves. So let me play this, and you can chime in with your thoughts as soon as I get through this 40-second clip here. Let's see here. We got all right. Here we go. Maybe. There we go.
Among Republicans, 93% are extremely or very proud. Just a single one, say they have little to no pride in being an American. But look over at the Democratic side. This is where we've seen this extremely or very number. It's been taking a tumble at 27%, which is way different than the 93. You do the quick math with me here. What is that? That's a 66-point difference here in terms of extremely or very. But look at this. The little or no proud to be an American actually among Democrats is greater than the extremely or very proud number. So we are just living in such a different universe if you're a Republican versus a Democrat on the basic fundamental question of being proud to be an American.
So I find that pretty remarkable. On the eve of our 250th birthday as a nation, if somebody would have showed me that when I was 14 years old or 20 years old, I forecasted like this is what it's going to be like as we turn 250 years old I would have said you're out of your mind. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's always the 5% or 3% who are like, yeah, we're on stolen land and all this stuff, right? But 36% saying they're not at all. That a third, Dave. That's remarkable to me.
Yeah, that's just bizarre. I don't understand, it would be interesting if they broke that down by age. You know what I mean? If they could, because I wonder the biggest voting block of the votes for Democrats right now are young people. And I just wonder whether or not that is substantially weighted towards like the college age, the pro-Palestinian, the pro-trans, all of those types of things. So yeah, if you're opposed to colonialism and you believe that the US is a colonial power and all that, I mean the other thing in the Democratic Party right now that I think influences all of that is there is such, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's that influences the Democratic Party, that there's this surge of Democratic socialists that are winning elections, and that the rank and file Republicans, the James Carvilles and Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumers of the world, they don't know what to do with those folks.
Yeah.
They're
rank and file Democrats. Yeah. I don't have the data you're looking for. I think I agree. It would be interesting to see that. Of the people I know who are like truly like anti-American, some of them in their 70s and 80s, who are the most ardent that now. So I look at that as like, okay, where are they getting their information from? They're
Sure.
getting it from MSNBC and CNN. That the older crowd, the 70s and 80-year-olds, that's where they're getting all their news from, or all
Sure.
their information from. So very heavily weighted that way. But the younger people are getting it from academia. I
Right.
don't think they're any more positive about America than CNN or MSNBC.
Yeah.
So I think it's less about demographics, maybe, although demographics is a factor, and more about where you get your information. And what I mean is, like, online, yeah, there's Blue Sky and there's these other kind of siloed platforms and whatever where everybody kind of talks the same line.
Sure.
But on Twitter, for example, and even Facebook, I would say there's room for more nuance now. Now, it wasn't that way 5 years ago. 5 years ago, there was no room for nuance. I think nuance is kind of making a bit of a resurgence, a little bit, not back where I would like it, of course, but
Yeah.
anyhow. So I think it's kind of demographics, but it's mostly that demographics indicate where people get their information from, and the information source would dictate that poll to me more than just like straight up age or whatever.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's that. The other thing that occurs to me when I look at that is, are those reactions to Trump? In other words, it's definitely true, and it's been true for a very long time, that if people talk about, for instance, do they trust elections? Democrats trust elections. Like when Barack Obama was in office, they trusted elections in. When Joe Biden was in office, they trusted elections in. When Trump won, no, elections are all rigged. And so
going back to 2016 when he beat Clinton, she still today says he stole the election from her.
It's rigged. And so I would bet, I think I've heard this as well regarding regard for the country, that during times when your party is in ascendancy, you believe that the country is on the right track and that you have faith that you're going in the right direction, all that kind of stuff. When your party is out of power, then it reverses like just on a dime. It just reverses on a dime. And so I would bet that a lot of the 93% on the Republican side, and I mean, at least maybe not a lot, but some of the 93% on the Republican side are because Republicans are in a little bit more of an ascendancy than the Democrats are. And I would bet that a lot of those results on the Democrat side are just, Trump reactions and the fact that the Democrats, and also obviously with all the things that are happening at the Supreme Court. Now, Trump didn't win 100%, but there's a number of rulings that went his way, quote unquote. And so I would bet that a lot of that kind of and that's been the way it's been since the Supreme Court turned more conservative. So I would bet that a lot of that resides in that too. So I think what you're saying is true. I definitely think it's news sources, because when the news source you watch basically says that everything is racist, bigoted, homophobic, etc., then sure, you're going to believe the country is in lousy shape.
Yeah, I would say that because of the difference in the ideology of each of the the dominant parties, conservatives and progressives, I think people I know today who are conservative would say, yes, I'm proud to be an American despite what the politicians are doing to our great country.
Right.
And I think more progressive folks would say, when we get the right people in charge, we'll have a great country then.
Yeah.
And I think that there's less of, now I could be biased, of course, but I think there's less of that our team's in charge, therefore things are good kind of belief. Now, that's certainly a factor. I'm not dismissing it, all of it.
Yeah.
But I do think there's, because of the just different beliefs in like small government versus big government, and personal responsibility versus entitlements from society or the government or the rich people or whatever.
Yeah.
I do think it seems to make sense to me that the more conservative folks would say, yeah, okay, we're going to have boneheads come in power once in a while. And despite that, and the things that they can do to, jack things up, if we went back to how the founders drew it up, it'd be a great place.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is the opposite of what the more progressive folks would say.
And that's the way that I will tend to see it, even when somebody who wins, who is not somebody that I prefer. I'll look at it and say, well, sure, but the institution of the Declaration of Independence, of the Constitution, et cetera. Those things are still strong, even when somebody is in power that I think is not, doesn't have the country's best interest or isn't very smart about how to execute the country's best interest. So I think that's really true, and I think it's definitely more suspect on the ideological left because they want to change. I mean, so the new left, the DSA left, if you want to call them that, Democratic Socialists of America left, they want to change the basic principles that are found in the Constitution. They want to change, and you don't do that if you think that the country is in good shape and on the right path. So I think that's very much the case.
Yeah, I'm gonna read this also to you. This is now I found this online, so again, you never know what's 100% true and what's not. But according to what this thing said, this is an excerpt from Calvin Coolidge's speech celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 1926. So here's what Coolidge said. He was a Republican, right? If I remember correctly.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Quote. About the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond those propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truths or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but are more ancient than those of the revolutionary fathers. End quote.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's brilliant.
I think that was 100 years ago. He said that, give or take a few days.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with it.
Totally.
Either we believe these ideals or we do not. Like Yoda, like there is no try. Do or do not, right? It doesn't seem the only way you could put in buts would be to give one group of people more rights and another group of people less rights. That's your only option.
Well, and this goes back to a belief about the world and a belief about, we've oftentimes talked about the immutable nature of both universal law and human nature. These are the things that it doesn't matter if you're 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, there's certain things that are always true at all times in every place. And the idea that and this is where conservatism is based on the notion that there are certain immutable philosophies that have stretched throughout all of time, whereas the leftist project believes that there are no immutable. It ultimately believes, or at least acts as if there are no immutable principles that persist from time immemorial. I mean, there's plenty of things that Plato, Aristotle, Socrates said, before Jesus that were just as applicable now as they were then, because they are immutable laws of the universe. And I think that's what Coolidge is talking about in that quote, that there are certain things that just you're either true or they're not true. And if they're not true, then the only place you have to go is despotism and is anarchy or feudalism.
Yeah. So if we look back so he said that in 1926, and if we fast forward 20 years, the 1940s, if you were let's say if you were in Mississippi and you were a black person in Mississippi, you were not experiencing all people have equal rights. That was not by and large how it worked.
Yeah.
So as we recognize those moments and mistakes and errors and all the misguided beliefs that led us down those paths or whatever, at the end of that, you could look back and say, yep, we got off track here. We need to get back on track to
Right.
everybody has the same rights and they're, inalienable and all that kind of stuff. Or we say, well, we goofed that up. We didn't do it right that time, but we're going to keep trying to tinker with things and get it right next time. And it seems like the idea of we had this clean slate, we had this golden opportunity to really make this thing, even though we're going to bumble our way through it because we're human and we're going to do stupid things along the way. We had the right vision, we had the right rules, we had the right guidelines and all that kind of stuff, but it just seems impossible for humans to say, yeah, the best idea that we had was 250 years ago and I can't make it better. That seems the opposite of how humans want to. We want to be, we want to take a good thing and make it better and put our own spin on it. We want to have a legacy and we want to have it to be our idea. Like, how in the world could we ever get to a place where we just say, yeah, but we're not going to deviate from this stuff, and when we get off track, we're going to get right back on course, and we're going to stick true to these things? Is that even a? They called it a great experiment for a reason.
Yeah.
Is that even something that's possible, do you think?
Well, I think if we recognize the principle of working towards a more perfect union, so that's one of the phrases that's included in our founding documents is a more perfect union, and that repeats itself over and over and over. Implicit in this idea of a more perfect union is that it's not a perfect union to start with.
Right.
That there are principles that we don't adhere to. In fact, the entire reason, for instance, for the Supreme Court to exist is to call us back to principles that are good principles that we oftentimes poorly implement, that we poorly do. Now, if you're a person of some level of humility, then you realize that maybe you don't have ideas that are so great that they should replace every other idea that's ever gone before you. So, and I think this is the difference you're talking about there, that there's plenty of people that say, just throw out the Constitution, throw out the Declaration of Independence, throw out all of that stuff. We're going to start over because it didn't work. Well, no, the base principle behind it, the slavery was illegal in the Constitution. We can say with 100% certainty that from a philosophical perspective, slavery was illegal in the Constitution. We can say in the Constitution that women had the right to vote in the Constitution. These are now, somebody said, what are you talking about? The women didn't get the right to vote until the 1920s in suffrage, and we fought a civil war over. Yes, that's true. All of that is very true. But the point is that the philosophy behind it existed when those words were written originally. We just didn't realize the outcome, the full outcome of that. Now, this is the same as any law of the universe. When we discovered electricity, we had a vague understanding of what electricity really meant. When we discovered, the motions, Newton and gravity, and, we discovered the laws of motion, we discovered all these things, these laws of the universe, and we knew a little bit about them. We didn't discover the fullness of them. We still haven't discovered the fullness of them. There's things that are embedded. For instance, there's plenty of things that are embedded in the laws of the universe right now that we don't know. It doesn't mean that the laws of the universe are flawed. It means that we don't know. We haven't seen the outworking of all of these things. The same thing is true. I've oftentimes made the comparison of the laws of the universe to philosophical laws. The philosophical laws are just as powerful and are just as embedded into the universal law as the laws of physics and chemistry and astronomy and cosmology and all those types of things are. They're still there, and because we don't necessarily recognize their full outworking, their full application, does not mean that those laws are not there. It just means we don't understand them fully yet. And that's been the case.
Yeah.
The Constitution probably has things in it right now that you or I and the Supreme Court and others don't really even realize are there. Not because we're dumb or because we just haven't seen the full outworking of these universal laws. They're based on universal laws. And that's where people of arrogance want to say, no, they're not universal laws, and the universe will respond to our greatness, and we can change the universe in any way we want. We can't change the universe in any way we want. There's lots of things we don't have the ability to change, and we never will have the ability to change, and we should recognize that in our politics, in our society, in our physics, in our science, in our cosmology, etc.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. That's a great corollary you're describing there. I never thought of it that way, but that is I think that's a fantastic way to I would say brilliant, but I don't want to, you want
All
me
right.
to walk out of your room to go home. Uh,
Never let get that.
no, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And we know from historical data, not opinion, data,
Yeah.
that immediately upon ratifying the Constitution and becoming a country, people went to work immediately to abolish slavery. Like John Adams and John
Absolutely.
Quincy Adams was the
Exactly.
second and fourth or second and fifth presidents.
Yeah.
That's their entire legacy. Like
Yeah.
from nearly day one, they're like, okay, we took this step. We had to get the thing ratified. We had to compromise in these ways to get the thing going. And now we're going to set to work fixing the obvious flaws,
Right.
i.e., slavery.
Exactly.
I, I wonder what could happen, what would have to happen, or what could even potentially happen to jar us back to a way of thinking of, okay, there's gonna be technological advancements, there's gonna be constant improvements. Continuous improvement is a well-known belief from everything from business
Sure.
to personal improvement, whatever. The same principles can apply to a country,
Yeah.
but process improvement and improvement in application still has to be driven by we have to get away from this thing where we need some arbitrator or arbiter to decide which group gets higher rights in this instance. What would have to happen in your opinion to get back to like just voiding all those beliefs, like no, everybody's equal, full stop, like he said, like Coolidge said there,
Yeah.
like full stop, everybody's equal, and we that's our baseline predicate notion. What would have to happen to get us back to that, you think?
Well, it almost seems like there would have to be. I mean, okay, so the thing that would have to go away to some extent is the complete concentration of power in in a small number of people, because I think the thing that prevents that from happening to the greatest extent is the allure and the greed for all of this power. So if you think back to the legislators of the 1800s, they're farmers and they're people that were just kind of real basic people, that they weren't looking for, becoming the next trillionaire or whatever. I'm not criticizing Musk. I'm just saying that they weren't, they were more basic people who were interested in becoming citizen legislators, going to Washington, D.C., staying there for a few years. There were no career politicians at that time. They didn't
No,
exist.
it was a sacrifice to go because you would be away from your farm for 16 weeks, and all the work you do for those 16 weeks or whatever, 12 weeks, whatever it was, would not be getting done while you were there, or you'd be delegating it to your kids. It
Exactly.
would not be done as fast as if you were there, maybe not as well because they don't have the knowledge you have of how to
Exactly.
fix machinery or whatever it is. That it was a sacrifice to go,
Right.
not a path to riches.
It was a public service as
Right.
opposed to, yes, a public enrichment. I mean, one of the fastest ways to become a millionaire in the US is just to go to DC. It's just,
Yeah.
and as long as that is the case, then everything else becomes subservient to that, because another universal principle is the principle of human greed, and that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. These are also fundamental principles that were existed in the time of Nero, in the time of Rome and Assyria and Mesopotamia. It's always been the case. And so when those things become the loudest voices and the highest sort of motivating factors, and the average person who holds the citizen legislator mentality is like, there's no point, they're hopeless. Any citizen legislator now is, somebody who has that impetus is going to say, I can't raise $500 million to become a senator. It's just not possible.
Well, and
So,
even if you're one of the handful every election cycle who does get in,
yeah.
they learn within a few hours or days that it's not what they thought it was going to be.
Right.
The power structure is not set up for citizen legislation.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
is not how it works anymore. And they either get squashed
Right.
or canceled, or
Or
some
sucked into the machine.
something is found that they did some nefarious, whatever thing, and
Yep.
they're just made powerless.
Yeah. And until that changes, until there is some kind of diminution of power from, concentrations of power, it seems like it's going to be hard to get back to those basic principles. It seems like it's going to be real difficult. But then again, that's where, we look at the cycles of history and we say, well, the best way to have that diminution of power is for everybody to be fighting for their survival and not knowing where their next meal's coming from. That tends to focus one on less grand ideas of your own importance.
Yeah. So last time, or either last time I talked to you or the time before, we were talking about, or I mentioned that one of the things we'd have to get to is a foundational set of principles, i.e. the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We've deviated so far from that stuff as being the guiding principle that we make decisions upon. The other thing I think about this pretty regularly, honestly. If you were to poll 100,000 people and ask them, what does the Constitution do? Does it grant rights to the citizens, or does it restrict the ability of the government? Right. I would estimate 95+% of people would get that answer wrong. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely, because we want a king. We've always wanted a king. Yeah. Everybody wants a king.
Right.
I think that's where the rights are going to come from. They're going to be granted by them.
Right. So I think one of the things that would have to happen also is for us to come back to this belief that actually these rules are there to restrict the government's intervention,
100%.
Not to bestow upon certain people based on whatever criteria, the not the legislators decide, the regulators decide, or the interpreters decide. Like those are the ones who actually are calling the balls and strikes and stuff. Not the legislators put out an idea like, hey, we want to do this thing, and they hand off to some bureaucratic agency to figure out all the fine print and the details. Well, the fine print and the details is what hurts people.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's
so
it.
The only other thing the thing I think we have the big, so something will happen. I was listening to an interview with Neil Howe just a few days ago, and he every time I watch him, he brings up one of the authors of the Fourth Turning, which we talk about a lot. He brings up things every time I see him that I'd forgotten about, or like a different angle or whatever. So I'm always fascinated to watch him. But my point of bringing that up is he kind of like, we talked about before, like a divorce is the worst thing you have to do until you get through it. And you're like, you look back and you're like, that's the best thing that could have happened to us. And that, not saying the country will go through a divorce, but those kinds of things, events in life, they're so horrific to go through. But on the other side, you're like, okay, everybody's in a better place now. And now we can move on. And now we can, so he's very much, glasses half full on that front.
Yeah.
The part that I don't have any idea, and he doesn't ever talk about, because it's not really the purpose of what he writes about. But when the Constitution was written, with very few exceptions, like the East India Trading Company would be an example of a company that was more powerful than nations.
Sure.
Well, now we have, I don't know, 1,000 companies that are more powerful than nations. We don't have one or two on the planet. We have hundreds. I don't know how many it is, but it's an obscene amount. That are each more powerful than a large group of nations.
Yeah.
I don't know how we overcome that, because you can have a document that restricts the ability of the government. Okay, fine. Let's say we get that.
Yeah.
The companies are more powerful than the countries now, though. How do we navigate that?
I think the only way that we navigate that, or the only way that is no longer the case, is they're all that way because of the financial system that undergirds them. In other words, it's like I watched this. There's this funny video, AI generated video of Elon Musk. He's sitting there talking to his dog, and then he comes to this knock at the door, and there's Bernie Sanders there. I want the $1 trillion. And then so Musk runs to the other room, and there's Elizabeth Warren is breaking through the window. I want the $1 trillion. Have you seen that one? So
I have not, but I can imagine. It sounds funny.
Oh, it's hilarious. Then he runs out the door, and Musk is saying, I don't have $1 trillion. I don't have $1 trillion. I don't have $1 trillion, because he doesn't have $1 trillion. And then he runs out the door, and he's running into the woods trying to run away from the ghost of a Warren and the ghost of Sanders. And then he runs into Zoran Mamdani, and he's there. I want the $1 trillion. Oh, he says, I don't have $1 trillion. It's all in my rocket company. And then and Mamdani looks, there's a rocket. The $1 trillion is in there. And so Mamdani and Warren and Sanders all run into the rocket, and he presses the button. The dog presses the button, and it's got. But the point of that, I mean, it was a hilarious little video. But the point of it that the way the companies that are essentially bigger than nations, the way that that goes away is when the system that undergirds them, the economic system that undergirds them, no longer undergirds them, and because their power is based on money. It's all based on money. And
Leverage. Yeah.
it's leverage. It's when there's no more money, it does, they don't have anything other than money. Now, right now, money is super, super powerful, right? It's insanely powerful. But it's just like in that Musk thing, he doesn't have $1 trillion. He's got pieces of paper that people out in the world value at a certain amount, and he's got enough of that paper that you add up the theoretical value of that, and it's over $1 trillion. In reality, how much money could Musk raise in a day? Well, a lot more than me, obviously, but he couldn't raise. He probably couldn't come up with $1 billion in cash in a day. Doesn't mean he's poor, but it just means that the way the power of all of these multi-gazillion, the Mag 7, the power of the Mag 7 is all on paper, and that paper can go away when people stop believing it. The only reason that the Mag 7 or the Mag 7 is because people believe it. When people stop believing it, it's gone. It's gone that fast. It's because it isn't real. They don't have armies. They don't have tanks. They don't have F-35s. And even if they did, they wouldn't be able to keep them flying after.
Well, but they kind of do by proxy. I mean, like the I can't remember the exact example. I want to say this was in the I don't know. It was first half of the 20th century. I can't remember what decade even, but there was a fruit company in the United States that something happened with bananas in like a South American country, and the government there was doing something that the company that was in the United States didn't like, and the CIA and the government just went there and toppled the government so that bananas would be cheaper or whatever it was, right? Well, that happened because the company had enough influence with the U.S. government, and then by extension, the military and the CIA. We just went and toppled the government to get what the company wanted. So I would kind of argue that they do have access to the F-35s. They do have access to the troops. They do have access to the armies.
But all of those, they do at this level. But when you go down one more level, when you go down one level deeper into the sort of substrata of it, it's still all based on a financial monetary system that can collapse in a moment. So for instance, as soon as all the government contractors stop getting paid because the $31 trillion debt of the United States has been called and nobody can pay it, and the Treasury can't write checks anymore, and the CIA officers are not getting paid anymore, then that all goes away too. So because that toppling of that government with the CIA, it still all depends on the financial structure that undergirds the U.S. government, that undergirds all of these other entities. If that collapses, if that even falters, I'll make a prediction. If the credit rating of the United States goes from AAA down to B or to C, then you're going to see all of these powerful agencies that are currently interfering in all over the world. Half of them are unemployed. They're not getting paychecks anymore. If the spooks can't get their paycheck, even a spook that's getting that's out there manipulating things, if he can't feed his family, what's he going to do?
Yeah. So short of a financial collapse, how can we diminish the power that these mega companies have?
Well, I do think I tend to be. I was sharing with you the other day about I was in the Futurist Society back in the 80s, which talks about flying cars and other things like that, which is very cool. And there are certain, technologies that could be democratizing if they are not fully monopolized by, the Mag 7 and others. So if people were able to essentially live off the grid, as an example, in a real kind of way, if they were able to generate their own electricity, if they were able to have their own AI and build their own robots and those types of things, that's probably too utopian to really ever come to pass, because at the end of the day, you still got to get chips from Micron and AMD
Yeah.
and
And you need the aluminum and steel and wires to build
yeah,
the robots and
yeah,
all that.
you
Yeah,
still
you
got to
still
have
need
all
all the
that stuff.
components.
So
Yeah.
it probably is the case that in a real fundamental way, it can't happen without a collapse, more than likely. Now, in most economic theories, uh, build in periodic recessions, if not depressions. They build those in.
Sure.
They're just part
Yeah.
of the recognition of how the universe works. And if
Yeah.
you artificially extend out, if you artificially prevent them like we are now, that doesn't mean it goes away. It just means we keep kicking the can down the road. And eventually, the built up recessionary or depressionary impulses are going to all come crashing down at once, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's probably the case
Yeah.
that it can't be done without it.
I think that the Constitution as written was a just remarkable document in so many ways, but there's two things that it didn't see coming. One was the fourth branch of the government being this, you know, uh no checks and balances for like the intelligence apparatus, the military industrial complex,
Yep.
and how that's wrapped into corporations. Like it didn't see that coming. I'm
Right.
not faulting them. How could you have seen that
Oh,
coming in
no, yeah,
1774 when they started writing that thing? So they didn't see that coming, and they didn't see coming the magnitude of the companies that they're just more
yeah,
wealthy and powerful than nations.
yeah,
Somehow I think we're going to have to address those two things, in addition to
yeah,
getting back to having a guiding set of principles that we all believe in and adhere to, and get back to a belief that the documents, that the Constitution or whatever form it takes on in the future, is there to restrict the government, not to
yeah,
grant rights to certain people. Because when you get in the mode of granting rights to people, there's going to be a person or an AI or whatever doling out the resources as it sees fits. Well, us just get away from that. Let's
yeah.
just get back to, So I don't know. Well,
Well,
more to come on that for sure.
the other possibility with that, Brian, I think, is I wouldn't have said this maybe a few years back, but the other possibility in that is there's more and more energy and emphasis around income inequality, around, and I've never been, and I argued against those arguments for years, because it's like, you're smarter than I am and you do more work than I am. God bless you if you make more money than I do. Who cares? It doesn't, you being successful doesn't make me unsuccessful. It just is the reality of life, and that's fine. But when you have such insane, levels of that, where you're seeing, income inequality is now not now an argument of the left like it used to be, or the extreme left is like, it's the left, the right, Europe, all throughout Europe, everywhere. That's a real issue now, along with, migration. Those are two huge issues that are issues for everybody now. And so those types of things could put enough pressure on the system where there's some kind of reforms that then end up taking power away from the oligarchs, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing now that you mentioned that, one thing he did say in the interview I watched the other day, which I think was with the Wall Street Journal. It was a credible organization he was
Yeah,
doing this kind of panel kind of a thing with. He pointed to three things that the fourth turnings always involved. One is uh, a global geopolitical conflict, a war between Russia and NATO, let's say,
yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
Internal conflict, like a civil war kind of a thing, and income inequality. Those are the three things he pointed to as being, this is these don't have to be the trigger, but they often are, those kinds of things. And
yeah,
I remember, the I think the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, there was a tell in there. I don't know how many millions of people lost their homes. And again, granted, many of them should not, or maybe most of them should not have gotten the loans that they got. Okay, I got it. It was predatory, all the bad things.
yep,
Somebody somewhere had an idea that we could do this thing to get mortgages to people who truly shouldn't have had them.
right,
That was a business decision
yep,
backed by the government.
yep,
And then when it all came crashing down, who got saved by the government? It was the companies, not the individuals who went bankrupt, not the individuals who lost their houses, not the individuals who were living with their parents and had to start over in life. Those people got nothing,
yep,
zero, other than their basic unemployment benefits if they lost their job.
yep,
And I was married at the time, and my spouse at the time and I both lost our jobs within 6 weeks of each other.
Yeah.
Indirectly, not directly, but indirectly because of the GFC, because lots of people lost their unemployment was like 12.8% in Washington or something like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, who did the government take care of first? The corporations,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
that has somehow that's got to be addressed.
Yeah.
It just I'm not saying they can't ever help a company. Of course, we want Ford to be around and GM to be around and Walmart to be around, whatever it is. I'm not saying screw them, let them
Right.
fail, but it has to be in somewhat balance. It
Well,
can't just be all of the
yeah.
funds go to the corporations and zero go to the citizens. Like it can't work
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, it has to be you. That's the exact word, balance. That is 100%. So if it's all and if it's perceived as preferential treatment to rich people and to rich corporations, et cetera, then again that's an indication that there's going to be a collapse because
Yeah.
people will only put up with that level of unfairness for so long. They won't put up with it for forever. And more
Yeah.
now, when especially that's why I point out that we're seeing the income inequality discussion on the left and the right both. We're seeing it all over the place. I'm seeing it, I'm hearing it. It's compelling. That wasn't the case a few years back.
Yeah. There was another tell during the COVID mess. There, they chose to protect the big corporations, but not the small businesses.
Right.
Like Costco and Ma Brown's General Store sold the same things. Costco could stay open, and Ma Brown had to shut down.
Yeah.
Again, these little tells, like they're very indicative, and then, which leads me to my next thing here. Well, how do we fund all that? Well, we just borrowed the money and printed money,
Yeah.
which I still understand why if we can print money, we have to borrow money. If we can borrow money, we have to print money. I'm not sure why we have to do both, but that seems to be our MO. As of yesterday, as you and I are recording this, U.S. debt now exceeds 100% of GDP for the first time since World War II. So we got that going for us.
That's crazy.
And then I do think we need to talk about the Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship. I think it's going to be a mess.
Well,
talk us through the ruling, Dave. You're more of a scholar on that stuff than I am, for sure.
I mean, the bottom line is the Trump administration and a number of people argued that it's not correct that a person can come here, have a baby, and that baby instantly becomes a citizen, regardless of whether that person that
Right.
has the baby is a legal entity or not. And the entire thing, the entire argument hinged on whether or not the person was subject to the rules of the United States or not. In other words, if the allegiance of the person who was born, it wasn't enough to be born here, but the rest of the clause in the 14th Amendment says that they are subject to the laws thereof, subject to the United States. And the Trump administration said, no, you're that isn't the case. Now, the justices said, well, that's not a good argument. And in reality, if they're here, they're subject to the laws. And, so there you go. Now, it's worth pointing out we're one of the only countries, if not the only country in the world, that has birthright citizenship. You go to.
I think there's two or three. I can't remember which ones they are, but I think it's very, out of the 230 countries or whatever, it's less than 1%.
Right. It's a very uncommon thing. And I think there was the interesting thing was there was a number of individual opinions on that from the justices concurring or dissenting. So, sometimes there's here's an opinion and everybody signs on to it, or the majority signs on to it, or the minority signs on to it. Well, there were a number of different ones in this, and I think and the conservatives were the ones, Alito, Thomas, had interesting arguments against that. So for instance, Thomas was saying that, without getting too far into the weeds, that, well, this was written specifically for a time and for a specific people, the slaves, and so therefore it should be applied. Now, it's a good argument. So, but at the end of the day, the question is whether or not they read it correctly, and it seems like the majority had a valid opinion. So, some of these things are are obvious, or it is this or it's not this.
Yeah.
This is one where you could have legitimately dissenting opinions and have some weight behind them. So that's where we
Yeah.
ended
Yeah,
up.
I have not I've not followed this closely. So my recollection of I think was it the 14th Amendment that this applied to?
Yeah,
I think because essentially when we abolished slavery, we
yeah,
said you can't kick all these people out of the country.
right,
They were born here,
right.
they belong here. That was the intent of the law, as I understand it, right?
Yeah, yes,
And I think one of the things that is happening now is we are relying on the Supreme Court to make law, not interpret law.
sure.
They may 100% be factually correct in how they're interpreting. Like, hey, it's an amendment to the Constitution. It says if you're born here, you're a citizen,
Right.
and that would then, in under normal circumstances, uh, tee up Congress. Hey, let's go ahead and fix this, and let's write an
Yeah,
amendment to the Constitution where we fix this.
yeah,
Of course, that's not possible in this era. Like, nothing like that's going to happen.
yeah,
And so, um, we say we have the No Kings rallies, and we don't want an emperor, and we don't want a king, and we don't want these things, but we have a completely inept Congress
yeah,
whose job is to fix things like this.
yep,
There's nearly zero agreement in any meaningful way on this kind of thing.
yep.
So what the hell's supposed to happen? You have to wait for some guy like a Lincoln or FDR or Trump to come along. And again, I don't agree with some of the stuff Trump's doing, but
Yeah,
somebody has to like set policy and like move us in a direction.
right.
It certainly ain't Congress, and it ain't supposed to be the Supreme Court.
Right. Well, and that's what we've ended up at. We've ended up with essentially a Supreme Court that is the fundamental. They're sort of a super legislative branch in a lot of ways now, and because as you say, because the Congress they won't make laws anymore. They don't make laws. They argue about budgets, and they just pass continuing resolutions and omnibus bills, and
Right.
they don't do anything. I mean, they're useless. They're pretty much useless.
Well, they do regularly put out sternly worded tweets.
Yes,
So if that counts for anything, then they're very active on that front.
well, they investigate lots of stuff. They're like an FBI that has no prosecutorial authority. So you can hold somebody in contempt of Congress, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's too bad. I guess I'm gonna go have breakfast now."
Yeah. Dysfunctional to say the least. All right, last thing I'm gonna this will be real quick. The last thing I'll share is because I know you're on the bleeding edge of AI technology. Ford has rehired human engineers after AI fails to match quality checks. So we're starting to see some chinks in the armor on AI.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how significant this is. This may be a nothing burger. I wouldn't know. But we're starting to see little cracks in the narrative. Meta, I think yesterday announced that they're basically going to be selling this extra compute power after the AI endeavors they took on didn't really pan out.
Yep.
Not a big reaction to that yet. I'm kind of surprised that Meta used to be one of the Mag 7,
Sure.
or maybe still are one of the Mag 7.
Yeah.
Essentially waving the white flag on that and like, okay, well, we got all this extra compute, we're going to sell that now. The AI story is just in the infancy, in my opinion. Like what we think it's going to be and what we've been told it's going to be and what it's actually going to pan out to be. I think my personal opinion is it's going to follow a very similar track as the .com thing.
The internet.
We're going to have all this huge building out, and then something is going to, happen catastrophically. It'll implode, just like all the stuff with the .com bust.
Yep.
But after we had that huge build out for the .com stuff, and then the implosion, we got the iPhone because broadband was cheap or whatever it was, or we had the ability. I'm certainly very confident all that kind of stuff is going to happen. I'm less and less confident every day that there's entire industries that are going to go away, and we're just going to all wake up and be artists every day for the rest of our lives, and starting in 5 years. That whole narrative seems to be coming apart, but it's not being recognized on Wall Street yet, and that's part of it. I don't understand. Like, what's the reason that's not like gravity isn't winning yet.
Well, it's FOMO. It's 100% FOMO, fear of missing out. I mean, so there's liquidity issues in investment now because everybody's dumping every spare penny they've got into AI infrastructure. And the problem is that if with the amount of money that's going to capex for AI infrastructure, the return on that has got to be so massive. The productivity increase on that to justify the amount of money that's been put into it, both in terms of borrowing money and in terms of investing money, in terms of every spare penny that everybody's got, this sovereign wealth funds, everybody putting money into it, has got to be so massive that how you're gonna have to have 100 times productivity, and I'm just pulling a number out of there, but you're gonna have to have 100 times productivity increase across everybody to make it pencil out at break even. It's just not possible. And so I think, yes, but you're right. But the reason that it's happening that way is because nobody wants to be left out of this. It's certainly a transformative technology. Just the internet was a transformative technology. This is an even more transformative technology. So that's true. But people always have, at the beginning of any transformative technology, they always have what they call irrational exuberance. You remember? I don't remember.
Yeah.
It was a Fed chief of some sort. I think it may have been Greenspan that talked about irrational exuberance in the 90s. And so that's, I think, what we're seeing now. And I do think it's going to happen probably pretty much like you're saying, that it's going to be, people are going to start realizing that they're not getting the return that, I mean, there's plenty of people that are getting good returns, but not the kind of returns that justify, tens of trillions of dollars of capex into all of these different things. So it'll find, and we don't even know at this point. The thing about AI is we don't know what it's really all about. I mean, so in the internet turned out to be mostly about the financial model of the internet turned out to be mostly about e-commerce and advertising. Those are the two,
Yeah.
Amazon and Google Ads. I mean, then Meta is all the big companies are who they are because of, not all of it, but because of that. And so we don't yet know where the ultimate business proposition for AI is. And so
Yeah.
until we know that, we can't predict that. You're gonna have some brief advantages along the way, and some fortunes will be made and lost. But yeah, I agree with you. It's justifying that capex is not realistic.
Yeah. Well, any parting thoughts for Kenny G, the people in the future we're telling what it's like to live through this tumultuous time as we celebrate our 250th birthday this week?
The other one that's interesting that we didn't talk about, maybe we'll talk about next week, is Russia and the survivability of the Russian Empire, and whether or not Ukraine ends up being the victor, the actual victor in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. I think there's some, or if it leads to World War III because Russia attacks the Baltic states and Poland, and there we go. So those will be interesting ones to watch. I think there's still some major international tumult that's going to happen around that.
Let me rephrase the question. What would you want Kenny G to know about our country making it 250 years so far? What would be the thing that would not be in the history books that you would want Kenny G personally to know this mattered, or whatever?
Yeah, I think Kenny G should go back and read, if he hasn't in his age, if he still has it available for him, he should go back and read the Gettysburg Address, because that most aptly captures the notions of the times from the founding and even until now, the philosophy behind if this nation survives, it will be because of the application of the philosophies that Lincoln had and enunciated there. That and we are in, if we didn't survive, we're still the longest running true representative republic in history. So there you go.
All right, fair enough. I think that the thing I would say is, at this moment today, despite all the chaos, all the frustrations, and all the crazy ideas, and all the tribalism and obsession over who's the victim and all that stuff, certainly we have made catastrophic blunders along the way.
Sure.
But I can't think of another nation that's done as well as good as we have, as quickly as we have.
Yeah.
And I truly believe it comes down to the principles and ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
If we just stayed true to that, again, the application is going to change. Technology is going to advance. And we're going to make bonehead decisions along the way, and we got to course correct. But if we just stayed true to that, we would be even further along, in my opinion. But we've only gotten as far as we have, as fast as we have. What other nation abolished slavery in 80 years? Like that's come on. I mean, nobody has done that, right?
Exactly.
Slavery was the thing when the country was founded, and within a century, we got rid of it.
Yep.
Where other countries have had them for millennia. I mean, that kind of thing. Even though we've done horrible things, also,
Sure.
I still believe that the principles that our country were founded upon are superior to any other model that's come along before or since.
Absolutely, and the results speak for themselves. Probably and this will probably be lost to Kenny G, but one of the things that's fascinating in this day that illustrates exactly what you just said is we just had two massive earthquakes in Venezuela, and Venezuela has been an adversary, an enemy of ours for a very long time. And who's the first ones on the scene? That's us. We were the first ones there. We're the first ones to any place, because those principles that you're talking about are higher principles than just national sovereignty principles that most countries are founded on. And that manifests in the world in terms of compassion as well.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add is when you watch The View and they talk about the old white men who wrote the Constitution, they were actually like in their 20s and teens, 20s and 30s when that document was written by those people.
Yep.
It was young people who had the ideas, not necessarily just the old guard. Ben Franklin was, I don't know, 65 or whatever. He was certainly influential and all that kind of stuff. But Thomas Jefferson was not 80 years old when he wrote those documents.
20s, yeah, exactly right. Yep.
So, but he was well educated, and he had a good foundation of knowledge to build upon, and he was young though and had new ideas. It was a fantastic thing. So, all right. As Dave said in the beginning, if there's anything you think we said especially right or wrong, we'd love to hear your input. We're trying to explain to future generations what it's like to live through this tumultuous time, as they will undoubtedly look back and wonder what was wrong with us. You can do that, as Dave said, at unsilentpodcast.com. Rumble has a great comment section. Happy Independence Day, Dave, and everybody listening. And until next week, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.